And this budget, we will have 7 deficits for 7 budgets from Bill English. And he cannot. I challenge the Minister to stand up in this House and explain to New Zealanders, while they've gone through the last 7 years, tightening their belts, doing what's been asked of them, being told election after election that the surplus would come, that the paying down of debt would happen when that occurred, and yet again the government fails. Yet again the government fails to deliver to hard-working New Zealanders who rightly will be looking ahead to this budget and say, after 7 years, what do we get? Well, what they're going to get from this government, if we look at these financial statements, is more debt, lack of growth in the economy in terms of diversifying it, lack of growth in the housing supply, not managing demand in terms of housing and neglecting the regions. That's what they'll get. And after 7 years, Mr Speaker, that is absolutely appalling. Let's look at the promises that the government has made. They've made the promise that New Zealanders' average wages will go up to $62,000. That was in an open letter that John Key sent to New Zealanders in the election time by September 2017. Well, at the moment, Bill English is spending all his time talking down wage increases. He's saying New Zealanders shouldn't expect more than 1.5% in terms of wage increases. Right. We're talking here about teachers and nurses, Mr Chair.
Grant Robertson.
We're talking here about teachers and nurses and people who serve New Zealanders every day, who've sat by knowing that the economy was under strain, but then Bill English and John Key declare the global financial crisis is over. Where's the dividend for those people? So if we look at the promise to get to $62,000 average wage by September 2017, that requires a 3% year-on-year wage increase. Bill English is only saying 1.5% this year. Broken promise number one. Then the national government tells us that we're going to see unemployment go down and go down to around where the OECD averages are. Well, what we know is that in the last cycle, unemployment went up. It went up to 5.7%. The only reason it even looks partly good is because of the Christchurch rebuild. We are not seeing the sustained investment in the New Zealand economy to diversify. If we look at a region like, shall we pick Wanganui, a great region of New Zealand neglected by this government that now sees the highest unemployment rate in the country, higher than Northland, higher than the East Coast. And it's regions like, places like Gisborne, Wanganui, Northland that are saying, where is this government? Where is the investment in the economy beyond commodity prices? Because we're seeing dairy prices slip further and further, and that's what this economy has relied on under National. Commodity prices, riding the wave of commodity prices. We're now looking, Mr Chair, at a $7 billion hole in the New Zealand economy because dairy prices have come off so far. And that doesn't just affect the farmers who wear that, it affects every rural and provincial community in New Zealand because they will see the impact of the loss of that money. So there is a broken promise around employment fueled by this government not being prepared to invest. But then when we look at the region seriously, Mr Speaker, we look at issues like investment in transport. Investment in broadband. Activity in rural broadband's only happening because communities are doing it ahead of the government. This is a government that's forgotten where it's come from. And it's interesting to stand up on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, and realise that this government is now so out of touch with its own voters in the regions that it neglects them in an attempt to try and milk the rest of the Christchurch rebuild to show that it's got some kind of vision for the economy. Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, what we now have is a government that has been reliant for so long on commodity prices, that has relied now for several years on the rebuild of Christchurch, but still tries to use it as an excuse that it is out of ideas. And for Bill English to stand up both in the election campaign and when he was asked, what new idea do you have to grow the economy? And he couldn't come up with one. And now he says there are no new ideas for housing either. Out of touch, out of ideas, an arrogant government in its third term. Once upon a time, the slogan was ambitious for New Zealand. Now it should be embarrassed for New Zealand, because that's what we're getting from this government. An embarrassing lack of investment in the economy, a Prime Minister who goes around embarrassing the whole country, and a government that does not have any ideas to grow the economy long term and in a sustainable way. Mr Speaker, these financial statements speak of a government that has lost touch with where ordinary New Zealanders are. The questions we get asked when we're out in the community are, where are the new jobs coming from? Where is the investment in new industries, in adding value, in ICT, in high-value manufacturing? New Zealanders have the ideas. They've got the interest, but they don't have a government that will back them. They've got a government that is complacent. It is sitting there waiting for those commodity prices to rise again, and the message for this government is that's not going to happen. Over the next 5 to 10 years, there's a glut in global milk supply. We've got to do something different, and you know what the government's response is? It's to change the targets for exports. When they came into government, they said 40% of GDP for exports. And what do now? Well, 30% was what they had when they came in. They fiddled around a little bit with the way they worked it out, but it's below 30%. It's dropping. It's 27%, it's 28%. We will not thrive as a country if we do not build our export base. This government is out of ideas, it's out of touch with New Zealanders, and it has completely failed to invest in the regions. It's failed on housing in a way that, Mr. Speaker, no government before it has done. It has completely failed to build houses, and it has completely failed to manage demand. And now we have the Governor of the Reserve Bank telling the national government, you have failed on housing. No building, no increase in supply, and now the Reserve Bank saying no control of demand. This is a government with its head in the sand. John Key tells us there's no crisis in housing. There is a crisis.
I call Russell Norman.
Thank you.